Well, before I begin, I thank you to Mark Strudemeyer and Mike Goss and Ned Steele, bringing the message in my absence to Alaska to see our son. Oh, it's good to be back. Good to be back. And thank you also to USFW. Mary Lee Comer delivered what she called the largest care basket in the history of USFW to our home last Sunday afternoon, and I've been working my way through it all week, including the gift certificate to Danville Dips ice cream. Well, we enjoyed our trip to Alaska. It was just a wonderful time visiting our son and daughter-in-law, who are, as you know, expecting their first child. So I spent a great deal of my time there urging them to name it after me, but they held fast and decided not to. Although we anticipate more trips to Alaska, despite getting COVID while I was there. Being the deeply spiritual person I am, I decided to attend Quaker meeting in Fairbanks the Sunday we were there. Fairbanks has two Quaker meetings, an unprogrammed progressive meeting and an evangelical meeting with a neon cross, drums, and guitars. I visited the quiet one in a little meeting house set back in a pine forest on the outskirts of the city. I got there about a half hour early and went into the meeting house, and other people started coming in and setting up chairs, so I got up and helped them set the chairs up in a circle. Their tech person was gone that day, and they were having Zoom troubles. It made me feel right at home. A half dozen or so Quakers trickled in, another dozen eventually joined us via Zoom, and then Quakers from Anchorage also joined us. During COVID, Quakers in Anchorage and Quakers in Fairbanks have come together to worship over Zoom. But those of us present gathered in a circle. No one spoke the entire time except Mother Nature, who always knows the right thing to say. At the rise of worship, everyone asked to share their names. They said, share your name, stand up, tell us where you're from. So we went around the circle and I introduced myself, and several people looked up at me surprised. And the woman next to me said, are you the Phil Gulley who's married to Joanne? I said, yes, I was. And she said, oh, we love Joanne. Why didn't she come with you? And then I had to explain that she's not as spiritual as I am. Boy, that was embarrassing. But I stayed afterwards to visit because, you know, it's a Quaker meeting, and meeting for worship is only half of it. The other half is staying afterwards to visit with your friends. So I stayed afterwards, and a woman there, I began talking with her. And I asked her, what are you doing up here in Fairbanks? What are you doing? And she said, well, Quakers first came to Alaska in 1897 from the California yearly meeting around, 1897. They came to set up schools, which was a laudable and well-intentioned goal, to be sure. But in addition to bringing reading, writing, and arithmetic, they also brought their culture, and which eventually swallowed up the Athabascan culture of Alaska. And as you can imagine, the loss of Athabascan culture and tradition weighs heavily still on the indigenous people. So much of their language, their customs, their rituals have disappeared. So this woman I met, knowing that Quakers bore some responsibility for the loss of Athabascan culture, is doing what she can to help them rediscover and honor their history. Even though she wasn't personally responsible for the loss of Athabascan culture, not being alive in 1897, she feels some responsibility as a Quaker and is helping to heal the cultural harm those first lasting Quakers did, albeit unwittingly. But it made me think how often religions end up having to apologize. In recent years, Christians have had to apologize and pay restitution to the native people in Canada, whose government in 1885 got the bright idea that taking native children from their parents and putting them in religious-run schools would be good for them. And so they did from 1885 to 1998. So it lasted a long, long time. Sent to live in religious boarding schools where many of those children were raped, assaulted, and even murdered. Researchers believe as many as 6,000 children died in the schools, many of whom were buried in mass graves, their parents never notified of their death or told of their burial. The religious organizations that operated the schools, the Anglican Church of Canada, the Presbyterian Church of Canada, the United Church of Canada, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Jesuits of English Canada are now being asked to remedy the harm they caused. Apologies have been offered, though the Vatican refused to acknowledge its culpability for many years until this past April, when Pope Francis finally extended an apology. Religions always end up having to apologize. We've been talking about the differences between religion and spirituality, and the last time we were together, I said the series was over. That turned out not to be true, and I apologize. Yet another apology from a religious leader. Because while I was in Alaska, I discerned one more difference, and that is this. Often, when religions do what they think is best, they almost always end up having to apologize. Their misguided passion, their unchecked zeal often leads to the diminishment and destruction of others, usually in direct correlation to the good they think they're doing. That is, the more determined religions are to save others, the more likely they are to harm them. Eventually, their excesses come to light and apologies follow, but never soon enough to help those they've hurt. Spirituality, on the other hand, means never having to say you're sorry. Because the goal of spirituality isn't to change someone else. The goal of spirituality is to change the self, which is working up. Having dedicated itself to self-growth, true spirituality has neither the time nor the inclination to monitor others. In this sense, true spirituality is the friend of freedom, refusing to impose its values and priorities upon others. Now, we have seen this play out in our nation. and around the world. Consider today's Supreme Court, whose Catholic tenets are fast becoming secular law. The court's religious passions, their lack of respect for hard-won precedent, will lead to the diminishment of others. The best for them will mean the worst for us. Their dreams will be our nightmares. Case in point, a 10-year-old rape victim in Ohio was 6 weeks pregnant and therefore denied an abortion in her own state, so was forced to travel to Indiana for the procedure. In what world is it okay to deny a 10-year-old victim of rape the right to enjoy her childhood, and instead insist by force of law that she assume the responsibilities of parenthood? In what world is that right? That is a second abuse every bit as vile and demeaning as the initial violation. A 13-year-old victim of rape in Ohio was urged by the Ohio U.S. Representative Jean Schmidt to consider her pregnancy an opportunity. Mark my words, the zealotry of today's court will lead to such abuses that apologies will one day follow, though far too late to help those they've hurt. Religions always end up having to apologize because they inevitably take an admirable virtue and pursue it beyond all reason. Roman Catholics, evangelical Protestants declare their high regard for human life. Now, as a Quaker pacifist, I share the respect and regard for human life. But I do not let my respect for potential human life override my respect for actual human life. Neither will I let my respect for potential human life turn me into a zealot, denying women their personal freedom in order to satisfy my personal beliefs. I say these things because in this nation now these things must be said. And I say more. I say more to these thieves of liberty. If you do not believe in abortion, do not have one. If you do not support gay marriage, do not have one. If you do not believe in interracial marriage, do not have one. If you don't believe in birth control, don't use it. If you're Muslim and believe in dressing modestly, covered from head to toe, then cover yourself from head to toe. If you're a Quaker and want to live simply in a hut, feel free. If you're a Christian who believes Jesus is the only way to God, believe that all you want. But do not make your personal choices as noble and virtuous as you believe them to be incumbent upon the rest of us, lest you one day find yourself apologizing for the cruelties that too often accompany zeal. Friends, those of us who treasure religious life, who belong in spiritual communities, need to often remind ourselves that the words "you must," "you shall," and "you will" have no place among free people. No matter who we are, We have the right to be free moral agents, vested with the power to live as we wish, to form families or not, to love whom we want, to follow our light as best we can and no one else's light. For there has never been, and will never be a truth made more lovely by coercion. There has never been, nor will ever be, a truth made more lovely by coercion. When I was 17 and began attending Quaker meeting at Danville Friends meeting, I was told by the pastor that if I wanted to become a Christian, it would be the easiest thing I had ever done. And foolishly, I believed him. What I have found instead is that the examined life of Christianity is one of the hardest things I've ever done, as demonstrated by Mike's question. How do we change this world without being part of the problem? How do we do that? What you are invited to, friends, what I am invited to, what all of us are invited to, is a life of difficulty. It is tempting to revert always to the simple answer, the settled dogma, and it is difficult, profoundly so, to have to think and rethink over and over. But in that path, I believe joy is found and meaning is given. And so this week, friends, think, and rethink, and learn and grow. That is the way of happiness. Amen. Turn and greet, friends.